to introduce today as part of the Program on Information Science Brown Bag talks, which are the only brown bag talks that feed you. Jefferson Bailey, who is Director of Web Archiving and Internet Archive, and manages their web archiving service, including Archive.it, which you all know and love, and has also been responsible for a lot of past, present, and future mischief, some of which some of us have been involved on together. Because this is on things near and dear to our heart, Kari Smith will be presenting the library's approach to some of these issues in summary, and then there will be time for some questions at the end. As usual, slides will go up in about a week. This is being captured in WebEx, and it'll be in the slides, and talk will be embedded in a blog post on the information site. And next month, we will have Scott Bradner coming by, who was Chief Security Officer at Harvard, a current Berkman Fellow, and one of the founders of the IETF, to talk about the history of the Internet through the lens of standards and protocols. Please, all right. Jefferson, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Kelly, too, for helping with the arrangements, and to MIT. Our founder at Internet Archive, Brewster Kale, is an MIT alum. Our director of engineering is also MIT alum, and one of my open data engineers on the web archiving team is an MIT alum, so lots of great connections. So I guess my title is Safety Nets. It's just a title. I'm mostly going to talk about web archiving stuff, which can be extrapolated to born digital stuff as well. I'll try to mostly talk about project-oriented work, and then tie that to conceptual trends instead of just high-level, paper academic stuff. We'll look at some stuff and projects, and if we want, we can open some URLs and do all sorts of things. But we'll talk a little bit about what we've done trying to preserve the web. So if folks don't know the Internet Archive, really quick background and history, at least on our web archiving services, started in '98, so it was our 20th anniversary last year. Big party. We work in a church in San Francisco. We're open to the public, and we are an official library of the state of California. And we have open Friday lunches, so if you're ever in San Francisco and you want a free lunch in the IA Brown Bag series, every Friday at noon, and there's a tour of the building, and we have multiple data centers, and one of them is in the church, so it's a fun place to visit. We are currently about 35 petabytes unique data. That includes all media type. Web is generally about half of that. And we are collecting at the moment about 7 to 8 petabytes a year. So it's a lot of data. We, as I mentioned, run all our own hardware and data centers in multiple geographic locations. We do lots of things that aren't web. We scan about 400,000 books every year. I forget what the per page per day metric is, but there are about 9 global scanning centers around the world, including a big one in Hong Kong. So there's lots of operations at high volume. They're all online. They're all OCR'd and format migrated and viewable in the IA open source book reader software. So that's a big part of the operation. We get a lot of music via the web, via donation, via scanning. We're currently trying to digitize every 78 record that ever existed in the US at least, which is around 500,000, I think, and we're at about 50,000, I think, so far. So it's a big project going on at the moment. We collect, I think, about 42 channels of high-def TV 24/7, so they just stream right into the servers. Most of them get text OCR of the closed captioning, so they're mostly text searchable in snippet form, and that is also a big data acquisition effort. We take a lot of scanned or ISO imaged software and then try to make it playable in the browser, so that gets a lot of press, not too much. And there are just some metrics for the web archive, which I mentioned, about half of 35 petabytes, so 17 to 20 or somewhere, it's about 600 billion discrete individual files. So that can be anything that resolves to an independent URL. So what have we done archiving the web? So Internet Archive was sort of one of the first to take archival, library, collecting, preservation, access approach to the web. There are, collections of quote-unquote the web from earlier, but generally in '96, the founder was doing a lot of crawling in the internet for Alexa, which is a traffic service that he sold to Amazon, and took a lot of that crawl data and wanted to preserve it to make a copy of the web, and that's how the Internet Archive started. So there was a for-profit entity and then a sister nonprofit entity, and the for-profit went to Amazon, which then funded the nonprofit. That's sort of how the web archiving started. Most interestingly out of that, I think, was that a lot of the early software development for tools that are still used in heritage-oriented web archiving came out of these efforts. So that's the archival crawler, Heritrix, the Wayback Software, which is behind the Wayback Machine, as well as the ARC and WARC ISO file format standards for web archives. We'll talk a little bit about some of those. So just quick run through of some projects and how web archiving got started. One of the first efforts was with the Smithsonian to capture presidential campaign websites. We did our first full crawl. We don't capture all of the web, obviously, it's far too large, but try to capture the most traffics or there's different strategies, but we basically ran our first full crawl in 1997 and donated a copy of that to the Library of Congress, including on this crazy sculpture, which LC then decided to deaccession and give back to us, so we actually got it back a couple of weeks ago. But all the crawl data is actually there and plays in the little sculptures. That was pretty fun. Worked with LC on a lot of other dedicated crawling efforts, including more presidential stuff. The Wayback Machine launched at UC Berkeley in 2001, and obviously gets I think we say about 400,000 or 500,000 users a day, Wayback Machine. So obviously some of those are probably robots, but it's certainly embedded into web activities. Started scanning books in 2002. We founded or co-founded with a bunch of national libraries in Europe, the IIPC, which is the sort of web archiving international consortium, the main one, in 2003, and so we're pretty active in that group. People were asking us to archive things, and so we said, well, how about if we start a service about that? We are independent nonprofit, so we get donations and we get grants and stuff, but we also have revenue-generating services for sustainability, and archiving is one of those, and Kari will talk a little bit about piece archiving. We do a lot of domain crawls of what are called country code domains, CCTLDs, so .uk for England, .fr for France, and so we attempt to crawl an entire portion of a country's web domain. So a lot of countries have legal deposit for anything published on the web, just like they do for published print books, and we don't have that in the US, but it allows them to capture a copy of their entire web domain, so we do a lot of those. We preserve all congressional websites as part of a contract with the National Archives, as well as hosting their webharvest.gov portal to all those. So that started in 2008. Happens every 2 years, every congressional election cycle. We added partners. We added national domain partners. We started doing more intensive crawling around 2010, which is multiple strategies to capture different portions of the web. A lot of it very shallow. The most popular or highly trafficked, very deep. Feeds from Wikimedia, WordPress, places like that. So there's lots of different crawling strategies. Started emulating software in the browser in 2014. That's been popular. We have almost 570 institutional partners that have used Archiveit at this point, and that's the history of the web archiving. Everybody knows the Wayback Machine. There's the screenshot. It gets a lot of traffic. There's been a lot of effort to make it more usable in a non-URL centric model lately, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So most of the early crawling is 1996, and so to sort of take projects, and I'll try to tie them at least to conceptual points, but the web is a historical resource. I think we can all agree on that at this point. There's a very early White House crawl. Obviously, the White House site we crawl every day. The changes between administration for the White House website are really fascinating over time because each administration tears down the old site and rebuilds their own. So you can just imagine what the Trump one looks like. Not a lot of content there, needless to say. There's the first MIT capture, which we were talking about earlier, pretty fun. But what we've been trying to do lately is make the Wayback Machine more useful if you don't know the URL that you're looking up, or if you want information beyond just replaying a web page. So there's a number of projects that have been released in the last 2 years and are ongoing around making that more useful. One of my favorites is that you can now look at capture information for the whole domain. So we can look at mit.edu, see all the different MIME types that have been captured: HTML, PDF, JavaScript, CSS, images, things like that, and really start to poke into how it's been represented in the archive over time, which is, for sites like MIT, hopefully very thorough and illustrative of change, but for us, it can be very spiky because we have so many different archiving strategies going on at any one time. So, but we get a lot of questions about, like, what do you have from the Denmark web domain in 2007, and tell me how many PDFs there are and how many PDFs were there the next year. So lots of interesting sort of the history of the archive kind of research efforts, and so we're trying to build tools and APIs to support some of those. I think some of this is probably pretty boilerplate, but obviously almost everything is published on the web now, especially when you talk about GovDocs librarians. Our many open access scholarly communications publishers really only are all publishing via the web right now, so it has pretty much taken over most avenues of media dissemination. So people look at videos and publish their videos on YouTube and Vimeo. They publish their stuff in PDFs on their websites. They publish podcasts and all files on Bandcamp and SoundCloud. Nobody does anything except for on the web anymore. So it's really consumed all media. Some challenges around that we haven't, as a community of library archives world, haven't quite figured out how to deal with. It's distributed in access. Anybody can look up a web page from anywhere, except for that web page is only served from one place. So if that server is down, then all these different avenues of access are confounded. And so a lot of the decentralized web and distributed models of not just access but preservation are working on how to try to solve that problem. And obviously we see a lot of contemporary history scholarship that is dependent on web sources. But what are some of the challenges? Well, the work format is totally generic. So a lot of researchers have really struggled using what we have decided are the standards for packaging archived web resources. It's very tied to the crawling technology right now. So a crawler will write files into a file, which is zipped, and then it's gzipped. So it has an incredible amount of metadata in it about what happened via the HTTP traffic, the server that it encountered, the transaction that happened, as well as, of course, the thing that it is accessing and downloading. But that wealth of metadata is packaged in a weird way. It's hard to extract. People don't really know why it's packaged that way. A work file is generally closed at an arbitrary moment in time or an arbitrary data size. Almost all of them write 1 gig work files. You could write a 10 terabyte work file. You could write a tiny work file. It could have 1 million HTML records in it, or it could have 1 YouTube video. So it's really just a package, and yet the package is sort of what we work with. So that challenged a lot of researchers. As far as replay, we talked about that. Most replay is obviously in Wayback Machine or Wayback the software, which is reloading a web page. Not a lot of great ways to interact with work or web archives in aggregate beyond that. And, you know, it's search functionality is not that great. As an archival resource, some of the challenges in web archiving are dealing with archived web resources. The web, of course, at this point is pretty much a lived experience. It's very customized to where you're browsing from. If you're logged in, all these sort of different, what browser you're using, of course. So there's lots of caveats that determine what gets loaded in your browser and what you experience in looking at the web. Many of those will never be archivable in any sense of the world. We obviously don't really try to recreate looking at an ancient manuscript in whale light. So it doesn't really seem like a terrible thing, but it does, challenge people. But it has some positives too. So one of my favorite aspects of web archiving is the plurality of representation. So archives tend to be bragging on the archive. The rich and the white and the powerful get their stuff preserved in archives. The common man sort of perspective is often lost. It can be contained in institutional records, and obviously these are non-published collections, so they're often governmental or institutional or corporate. But you don't necessarily get a lot of direct first-person experience from marginalized voices. The web, I think, ignoring some issues around the digital divide, certainly allows us to collect at a scale and a breadth that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. So even a small scale web crawl can get hundreds of thousands of documents. So you can preserve just thousands and thousands of citizen blogs on a certain topic with a pretty small human and cost effort. So that's exciting. But I'll talk a little bit about collecting and building collections. So I mentioned we were on probably 3 to 400 crawls are running at any point during a given day. So about 200 to 300 archivic crawls, and we'll say 100 different methods of crawling in non-archival land. Those are domain and big projects, special feeds. Doing Save Page Now, you can enter a URL into the Wayback Machine and automatically archive it. You get, I think, about 50 of those a second. So there's lots of people contributing those. Often it's algorithmically done, so it's not just all users clicking, but lots of different archiving strategies going on at any one time. So the global scale harvesting is high volume, but pretty straightforward, and it's complex in its approach, but it's straightforward in how you do it. You spin up a crawling cluster and you launch and make archive stuff. It's pretty. Archive It is a different model, so it's more ground up. I mentioned there's 500 to 600 institutions using it. They are doing much more intentional selection of websites to make sure that they are crawled well, crawled frequently. They are adding subject-based metadata. I'll let Kari talk a little bit more about some of the curated web archiving, but that's a different model. So the global stuff comes top down, lots of stuff comes down. Know a whole lot about what the intent was, whereas Archive It is, of course, the different model, much more distributed and it's a software as a service, so it's a web-based application. It gives you lots of stats. People can define frequency, do QA, so it supports all those types of efforts. There's a public website, archive-it.org, so we have our own public access port that people can build their own little institutional collections and stuff. So those are examples of that. We try to expand that model not just to institutional users, which are pretty straightforward, but also into specific communities. So a recently funded project from IMLS is to get public libraries to build local history collections of web archives. So local history special collections in public libraries are pretty common, but I think there were 3 public libraries doing web archiving before we launched the project, which is why we launched the project. So how to align existing and thinly resourced organizations, how to align existing curatorial approaches to web and even born digital, because there's some affiliated IMLS funded projects that are doing more personal archiving kind of approaches. So we're doing this in a number of different domains, not just public libraries, but there's of course state and local history organizations, art libraries, academic researchers, so lots of academic projects crawl the web and then throw the data away once they've done their data mining. We'll take your data. So this has been an exciting project, and we got some extra funding, so it'll be kicking off soon. And it is not just to obviously build local history collections and archive local history materials driven by local institutions, but also, of course, build a whole cohort network. So in the National Digital Stewardship Residency Program, which has been a popular and successful method of expanding digital preservation expertise for new professionals, sort of mimicking that model for existing public library staff. So combine, support on technical tools and services that are basically funded by the grant, and then archive local history things to align collecting methods with the way that people are now producing records, and 3, to actually provide training and open educational resources to build professional networks in specific domains. So we got 110 applications, and we're funded for 15, but got extra funding, so we're going to have 28 or 30 actually. There's the libraries. Lots of great big ones and lots of great small ones too, so that should be an exciting project. As I mentioned, we also work with a lot of grant-funded research projects, so many times they want to do data mining, they want to get stuff from the web, which is relatively easy to get at scale, and then they don't really care what happens with it after that. They are interested in it being archived, but it's not part of their project or their mandate. So this is just a sample project where we do that, where we archived 650 or so community newspapers. So this is a cool project because they're trying to look at what's the health of news going forward, and they took these 663 newspapers exactly represented the diversity of America as a whole. So they chose small little hometown newspapers as well as big metropolitan ones, and wanted to see how news topics were represented in different communities. So it's a very cool project doing more than just web archiving stuff, but a good example. And they have an archive collection, and you can go and look at all these snapshotted papers. We have K-12 programs, so we're trying to work with students to get them to obviously select websites of interest, which are always hilarious, but also to understand how primary resources are now traditionally web. So Congress partner on that one to their education outreach program. Another interesting sort of researcher-oriented method that we've tried to do for access are researchers that use the Wayback Machine, basically sort of the opposite model of Archive-It. They already know the websites, but they don't exist anymore, so they find them in the Wayback Machine and put them in their scholarship. And so we were like, well, why don't you make a cool special collection out of that? So using the archive as, you know, the corpus from which a collection can be built instead of building a collection and then archiving it has been another fun way that we've worked with researchers. So someone was writing about Katrina blogs and how they helped the community sort of recover from the disaster. And so we built a special collection out of all the websites that she talked about in her book. And I think that speaks to a larger point, which may be good for discussion or Q&A, which is web crawls are massive and huge and global in scale and multi-petabyte every year. So what's in them, right? We know about the main websites and CNN and New York Times and stuff like that, but we actually get, you know, full runs of open access journals. We get full director's cuts of movies. There's lots of content that's basically hidden in the web archive unless you know the URL. So just like extracting special collections, we can also extract a huge corpus of research materials. So one of our projects currently is mining PDFs in the Wayback Machine. Well, it's maybe twofold. One is taking all the PDFs out. What do they look like? How much is scholarly literature? How much is useful scholarly literature? How much is useful open access scholarly literature? And trying to figure out all the way down to basically build a research corpus that we just got without really doing anything. And then the other avenue is let's take things like ISSNs or DOIs or any identifier that has a URL associated and make sure that it's getting into the web archive and that we're capturing it well, or that we can offer to capture it well if people are interested in having it archived. So that's another project. One that got a lot of attention this year was archiving.gov. So the history is in 2008, sort of a number of institutions, CDL, Library of Congress, UNT, Stanford, a number of others got together and said we should preserve .gov because it has no natural custodian. NARA sort of tells agencies, you know, they provide guidance on records retention, but essentially agencies are responsible for their own preservation of their websites. So that's, you know, good or bad. This year it got a lot of attention for being bad given the turnover in administration, but it's a big project. So defining the government web presence is, of course, very hard. There's no one URL list of every .gov domain. We did work a lot with 18F and the General Services Administration that provide the technical services to the agencies, but they're not a registry and they don't necessarily have the mandate to actually make a usable and updated list. There are lists out there of .gov domains, but not necessarily one authoritative one. So what we did was try to collect as many as we could from anywhere, and so we got lots of contributors, including from NARA and from GSA and data.gov and a number of others, as well as Google contributed some of their lists. So we tried to build as big a list as we could and then crawl as much as we could. This year it got a lot more attention because of the sort of endangerment of federally funded data that became, there was a great popular awareness of the ephemerality of web materials once people start taking them down for political reasons. It's obviously highly ephemeral just from neglect, but so there was a lot of press, and we tried to really archive as much as we could. These are some of the partners. People could nominate. You could see the difference between years and nominations. 500 in 2008 and 15,000 this year. We also worked with the data refuge and a bunch of other teams. So every event they held, we could nominate a URL, and we would get a feed of those. So it was definitely over 150, 200,000 at this point. That's, specific URLs to data sets and stuff like that. There's a portal. It's all public domain because it's .gov federally produced, so you can download it if you want 200 terabytes of data. I encourage you to do so. CDL has the front-end portal to it, which isn't updated yet, but it will be soon. So we also try to archive all the social media of anything.gov. So there actually is a pretty good API where all agencies are required to register their social media accounts. So about 9,000 social media, about 200,000 domain URLs, and all the crowdsourced ones I mentioned. So we were trying to get web FTP servers, which hold a lot of federal data sets, and social media. And there's just some general stats, 200 to 220 terabytes of data. Currently, we basically just run it 3 months before the election, 3 months after. So it's intended to be a bookended snapshot crawl. It would be crazy to try to scale up. This is all unfunded, by the way. It's everybody contributing what extra capacity they have across multiple organizations. So, but got a lot of good attention. We tried to extract some fun time collections from those. So one, we took every PowerPoint from the .mil web domain, which is like .gov domain for the military, and then make the PDFs into PowerPoints into PDFs and make them searchable. So if you like military PDFs, which you should because they're amazing, of course, in the visuals, then that's a special collection. One of the fun ones was he took early .gov materials because we wanted to find people with funny outfits or funny haircuts, and did facial recognition software on every image extracted from the archive of .gov materials. So just pictures of government folks hanging out at government buildings. And it worked pretty well. So, I mean, some of these are just R&D type things that we want to eventually scale to other materials, but .gov always offers a nice sort of test corpus. But these are also continued examples of what do we have, how can we work with it, and how can we make it either useful to people for study, or how can we use them to make them different access points into the collection. So this is probably the most popular example of that, which we did for the anniversary last year. We took the GeoCities web archive, extracted every animated GIF, and made a search engine on top of it. So if you want, gifcities.org, it's like the most fun project ever to play with. You can just type in search queries, and almost every GIF will take you to the GeoCities page on which it's embedded. So got a lot of press, and people were super excited about it, so it was really fun to see the popularity of it. But again, it was sort of a project of, we have this great, amazing GeoCities web archive, just like the .gov stuff, just like other specific crawls. How can we make it more usable than looking up a URL? So this is a fun example of that. I guess we'll see if it plays, but this one got a good bit of research use, including people making data visualizations. I won't play the whole movie, but they basically just took this, which is like that's one big data visualization lab at NC State, and just extracted all the GIFs and made them a big wall. Pretty good project. Surely can't beat that one. thing. Also, the Berkeley Art Museum took everyone and made an artistic interpretation of GIFs. So quite fun. Got it for a second. They then took the GIFs and did some crazy new media art thing, and then projected this on the side wall of the Berkeley Art Museum and had an event for it. So that was super cool as well. And it's good examples. I mean, I'm not just playing because they're cool, even though they are, but good examples of not just researcher reuse for data visualization, fun and games, and student use. Artistic reinterpretation. We have lots of artists that come to Internet Archive and ask for, like, give me a million podcasts, and I'm going to mix them up into some, super dance song. So I think if you take these collections, all of our archival collections are getting larger and larger with Born Digital and web stuff. How can we get users more involved in using them, and how can we extract parts of them? And, a lot of these are tied up in rights or IP, but you can get around that with researcher agreements and, make sure that people have very dedicated use of it and aren't going to give it to other people and things like that. So there's ways to manage what I think traditionally have been hurdles to providing bulk access to materials. So it's been really fun to see a lot of these take shape. And then one coming up that's not ready yet is Friendster, so I'm really excited about that one. Just be prepared. So collections, collecting, and how to try to make collections reusable in different ways, as well as provide different modes of access to them. Technologies and challenges. How am I doing on time? Okay. Technologies and challenges. So I've talked a little bit about the variations in the complex the format of the work, the extent of the data that we have to deal with. So things like .gov. Like, at some point, I have to turn off the crawlers because I don't have any more disk, or I have to buy $100,000 more in drives, and yada, yada, yada. So you can just collect pretty much as you want at this point, with not crazy intensive amount of hardware resources. Preserving those through time, of course, is a different challenge, but getting data is not difficult in our current records creation environment. The storage and computational infrastructure, the storage is not too challenging. Certainly people are doing big storage at scale these days. How to work with this material is quite challenging. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the researcher section. The diversity of data, a web crawl just gets anything. Figuring out what's in there and how to work with what's in there can get quite complicated. The user specificity, we talked about full content access, so people, I'll talk about it a little more in the researcher section, but everybody wants everything to make their argument infallible. That becomes obviously impossible when you get into petabyte scale of data. The conceptual challenges, so acquisition and provenance opacity. So we have hundreds of crawls. The idea that we could write very useful metadata for hundreds of crawls per day is not feasible at all. So there's sometimes collection. We can put in seed list. We can add crawler configuration. Some of that stuff is meaningless to a user. Some of it is probably useful. But why crawls run, how long they run, why we started them, what the original seed list was, a lot of that is not well documented and probably never will be. You can either spend your time documenting it or doing it, and I guess our choice has been to spend our time doing it. So that's a real challenge, not just for researchers, but for general users as well as people that are sharing collections or putting collections together. The web is too big to capture it all, so what's your decision matrix for how you decide what to capture? Crawler configurations have a big impact on what's collected. You can exclude things, you can include things, you can tell it to get 4 hops out, or 1 hop, or no hops, get everything on this subdomain. It can get very complicated very quickly in a way that users don't necessarily care about, but sometimes they do. Obviously, we don't have any great mechanism in our current web world for knowing when something changes. So some websites haven't changed since they got put up in the 90s, and some change, every 30 minutes. The volatility of that is hard to determine, and it's hard to track. And even if you could track it, that doesn't mean that you can necessarily address it. Getting web archives and defining it, I'm going to pass that one out. Hard. It's complicated, and I think we haven't really figured out what schema links are. The idea of a bibliographic record doesn't tie to something that's changing every day. That can even switch domains, but still represent the same thing. Actually, MIT is a good example. We're talking about it. So how we deal with that, it doesn't really work for bibliographic stuff. It doesn't really work for like a collection that comes in once it's used, like the sort of traditional article acquisition model. So that's complicated. Access is hard, so most people use Archive.it or Wayback Machine or something to provide access, because the Wayback server is super complicated, because you have generally billions of things that you need to provide access to in a way that is speedy, because people have an expectation of using the web that is hard to recreate in an archived environment. The lure of ever more data, so we know that challenge. And then people often are very challenged by, like, why didn't it crawl this? And there's a million reasons. Yep. 10 minutes. I think I'm on time. So those are just some conceptual challenges. Community challenges. There's still a lot of people that don't do web archiving at all, even R1 universities. So the method of collecting is still new and often confounding to people. So, especially for smaller heritage organizations, it's hard, and it's hard. It's technically complicated. It can be time consuming. There's just lots of barriers that we have to figure out how to solve for people to make it easier. There's not a lot of collaborative technology development. I'll maybe whiff by a couple of projects we're trying to do, but for the most part, we are lucky enough to have like a comparatively large engineering team, as well as sort of having developed a lot of the early tools. So we can do it, but for a place that already has fractionally staffed web archiving program, they're not going to have the capacity to contribute engineering time, except for in very small piecemeal fashion. So figuring out how to make that work, which I think we as a community are having success in other digital library areas and repository software, ILS software, and things like that, but hasn't really trickled down to archiving technologies yet. And then there's other reasons here. The technology is complicated, still in Java, programming languages, things like that. And research services are hard. So one of our collaborative projects is API development for multi-institutional API development for how we can move web data around seamlessly between different archival repositories. So we have another grant and are working mostly with Stanford and Locks on doing that. So it's finishing up, and I'll skip some of these slides. But that's one example of a community-oriented effort. Hopefully there will be others, and hopefully the activity of web archiving will become more important to institutions in a way that they can contribute more technical resources, because it's really the big challenge so far. I put this in here just to talk about how we were trying to do Wayback Machine better. So there is a beta version that does have search integrated. So the obvious challenge, we can't do full text search on the Wayback Machine because it would be massive. We're not really Google scale. But we can take things like, if somebody linked to this web page, what keywords did they use to describe it that is not a URL name? So any inbound link to a page, we can take that text and make that the text corpus you can search. You can also, of course, take the URL name and then turn it into words. That's what we did with the Gift Cities project. But the idea is, like, what is information on the web that describes other information on the web, and how can you use that for discovery mechanism? Since we're never going to be able to take all the full text. So that's how it works. It's basically built on the anchor text of inbound links to a homepage, and it covers over almost 1 trillion inbound links. So it's a big data project, but hopefully pretty seamless in the use. This is actually a pretty good example. This was another funded project. So our other challenge, technical challenge in web archiving, is that the crawlers they're link-based crawlers. They find a link and they download that file, find all the links on it, download all those files, and just keep doing that forever. The web is not really a link-based thing anymore. It's scroll and it's interactive. So it's mostly dynamic, JavaScript-driven. All social media is dependent on user interactivity to load more content as you scroll and do all these behaviors that a crawler can't do in an interactive web page. So we're more high-fidelity, newer but not scalable method of archiving is to capture the exact HTTP traffic as well as have scripted user behaviors where a bot clicks, drags, and scrolls, and does little scripted behaviors. So you can actually find the JavaScript tag, and you can click or scroll on the button, and it loads in the browser or something, and you can capture that traffic, and then you have a better archived copy. You just download the homepage. But to do that, there's the complicated people diagram. To do that, you basically have to launch a browser. So how many browsers can you launch, on a server? Not that many. Because Chrome is Chromium, which is sort of the open source version, is pretty resource intensive. But this is what it looks like when it happens. It opens one, it scrolls and clicks and does all these behaviors and captures it. But you can't really scale that in any way to get, billions of URLs a week. So what's the trade-off there? That's something we're figuring out. You have this one method that gets a lot and is really fast, but it doesn't get necessarily the best fidelity of some websites. And then you have this other that gets great fidelity, but it doesn't go fast and it doesn't scale, and it's resource intensive. So all these crazy sort of technical decisions and balances. Last section is research and services. I think I'm doing pretty well. So how do we, what's awesome about web archives for researchers? They have all these different types of content. They have great longitudinal value. So how does something change over time is something that's incredibly useful to scholars. And the web is amazing at doing that sort of, not really editorial, but it has a version history, essentially. And web archives are pretty good, and you can crawl enough to actually get to document change over time at a large scale. And of course, there's so much data that it's great for data mining. It's generally pretty structured data. It might be HTML inside of JSON, inside of something else, but generally, the web it allows for dirty data, but it's usually pretty structured data, and you can extract things pretty well. So how to take the awesomeness of web archives and make it useful to people. We generally try to do APIs or different types of access models, but we also do a lot of bulk data transfer. So here's just a slide about what researchers want and what web archives have and how they sort of overlap sometimes, sometimes don't. But we've been thinking about how we can do it at scale because we don't have a lot of staff or research support, basically. It's just mostly one or two of us part-time trying to do what we can to give people at a wide scale. So we want to try to figure out how can we do new access models, how can we make collections more insightful, how can we leverage our infrastructure, which is quite large, and we do have cluster computing stuff that we can do, that we can use to support this, and how can we just get people to do stuff more. Google sponsors some digital humanities stuff. I like this quote. Researchers don't necessarily need huge sets of data. They always think they do, but they actually don't. What they need is flexible data delivery services. I just like that idea because you can give people everything. You can give them parts of things. You can run jobs for them and give them the output. And you just have to sort of match what they come in with, what you can do, what you have time for, and what the data supports. And that's a really complicated bridge to cross when it comes to web archives. We have lots of partnerships. We've been trying to do derivative data sets. I think other places like HathiTrust Research Center and others are trying to figure out if we can't give people everything for whatever reason, it's too big, it's too complicated, we're not allowed to, how can we give them stuff from it in a way that's useful for them? So this is sort of our first pass at that. People are interested in what links to what, or just graphs, be they social graphs. For us, it's mostly link graphs. This thing linked to this thing over time. So how did the Democrats link to Republicans in '98, and how did they do it in 2008? And that's actually pretty easy to study. The crawls are pretty good. The graph is interesting, and so you can get changes from that. People want just the raw metadata. It's just like what it was linked to on this website, or what did this whole domain, how many images did it have? So we have that in a sort of WAT, which is a derived metadata format. And then names of people, places, and organizations. Everybody loves name entities, so named entity extraction. So these are just attempts. We can't give you all the data, but if you're interested in the name, the URL, and the timestamp, here it is. And we can run all these like compute jobs ourselves pretty much internally. But we can often then build APIs on top of them or put them into like Python notebooks, which are quite popular these days, where the code runs in the browser. A person can just change the query in the code if they're sort of data science-y, and it'll, using the same data, run a different script to do a different extraction. And then put those into visualization databases. So that's one approach. Other approaches are doing the analysis ourselves and then giving people the output. So we just looked, language identification is something we're working on now, which is languages and websites. At some point, you'll be able to go to the Wayback Machine and say everything in French on the French domain between these two dates. So we're going to eventually start indexing and analyzing language. Of course, you can go from there, and you can do genre, you can do concepts, like LDA-style topic analysis. And we've done some of those, and some of them scale well, and some of them don't. But at some point, you should have a URL. You have what is now the index, which is about 11 pieces of information, which are mostly related to when it was archived, its MIME type is. And then our hope is that you can extend that index to have what language is it in, what are the concepts does it represent, is it like news or e-commerce, or what type of site is it, what names are mentioned, if it's a text URL, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we're trying to do. That's one approach to it, derived data sets as well as analysis data sets that we just put out there that link something like language to all the URLs that are in that language. This is a quick example, which is we always have people that are just interested. I only want to surf within the historic German web domain. So I don't want to look at any website that's not from 1998 on .de. So we've been building some of those as test portals so that you actually never leave this closed environment of what it was like to search the German web at 98. Or at least, give people a pop-up if they're going into a .com or .fr or something like that. So that's another attempt to sort of, we have all this stuff in the archive, a lot of it collected via different crawls, so it's not like there's one .de crawl from the early 2000s, but we can take all the DE content from different crawls and just make a specific access interface onto it. Events, datathons, I guess I just wanted to put a slide in there to mention all the social aspects of trying to support research use. We worked with the White House to do a datathon on the Obama social media. Archives Unleashed is a great project to look at, which has done the most impressive and successful work on getting researchers who don't have web archive experience to come to events and work with specific web archive collections. So they've been super popular. And then just videos and tutorials and all the kind of workshop-y stuff that we all do. And we've had some great successes, so I just will mention them so people can see them later in the slides. Doing term analysis across of all .gov and the Web Archive, a pretty interesting one. Trying to track how terrorism is represented, sort of, after 9/11. An interesting one where people analyze the color of all the images in the Yugoslavian web domain to look to see if during the political turmoil there, because they're two different flags, as the country sort of transitioned, was that represented in the images at scale, which is a super fascinating project. I mentioned the sort of link graph approach of political parties linking to each other over time, how these changed. And then sort of GeoCities as a community, because GeoCities has community subdomains, so you could be in this community or that community, and so there's studying all the GeoCity web archives to see how people form themselves in that community for sort of anthropological reasons. So there's some researcher examples using web data at scale to answer sort of researcher questions. Generic framework for how we're trying to support it. We often put boxes in drives and ship them to people. We put derivatives on websites and people can download them from APIs on top of data and people can use data. So check it out later. That's pretty much saying what I just said. So conclusion. Good on time? Done?
Yeah.
Okay. Done. Good one. Web Archive's awesome. Scholarship hard. They unsettle prior methodological approaches, but also have lots of potential. 2, we're just going to have to be increasingly accepting of the fact that they have lots of challenges over traditional archives. Research use introduces a lot of barriers as well as opening new opportunities. And then there's just mediation at lots of different levels for web stuff. We're going to have to build new technologies, new practices, new collections, and new research service models. That's all. I guess I'll end there. Okay. We want to leave time for questions, so that's pretty much it. Thanks.
Can I do a quick 3-minute?
Kari will summarize. You can have a full 5 minutes.
Right.
We have the room.
We have the room for another half hour.
For another half hour, so questions will begin after.
Stop sharing this in the apparently. Okay, so what I wanted to do was awkward.
Oh, that's still my screen. Well,
Whoever's plugged in,
different than the thing.
if you're going to be on the screen out there, you just need to grab the cord.
I'm sorry. Thank you. That was magic. Not showing, but it's showing. Yeah. Okay. So, one thing I wanted to just...
and then just go full screen.
Okay, full screen. You see that? But
That's my...
Okay, so,
Yep, share screen with me and then go full screen.
didn't I share your screen? I see. I am sharing my screen.
Yep, I can see it.
It's on there, too.
You're good.
Yeah. Okay. I just need to get rid of Kelly. Anyway, so on the Engineering the Future of the Past blog from the Institute Archives, I did an update when the visiting committee came here about what we're doing with web archiving, and since we're waiting for our new digital archivist to arrive on November 1st, this is still pretty much a bit of a roundup there, so you can get information there as well. We have an archivist collection as part of the experimental funds from acquisitions. We had a 1-year trial for using Archivit to see what it would be like if we spun that up, what kind of resources would it take, how could we start collecting websites from the MIT domain. So I have a few collections that we've started. This is currently kind of the way that looks, like Jefferson showed you, different collections that we've, domains that I've crawled so far. Again, kind of as a pilot on this. Right now, these are all still not public available, probably because we have to do quality assurance and add some description and do other things that we haven't been able to do so far. Another thing that is available at MIT libraries, and it's going to be being rolled out starting in January, is MIT is also a partner with PermaCC. And so this is something that Katie Zimmerman, Nancy and I have been working on. But effectively, MIT people now can have PermaCC links. So this is where if there's a very specific web page that somebody needs to cite in a publication and they want to make sure it's captured, it's not web archiving. It's a matter of saying, like, here's a particular page. So for instance, I did a PermaCC to the archival policy because that's a URL that then I include as a link to in all of the references for material that I'm archiving for the MIT according to this policy. So this allows us to have a specific web thing there that is that. I also have that whole website archived as a web archive, but that's another way of doing it. So that's one thing there. Overall, generally, in terms of some of the kinds of research type work, challenges that we have specifically are things where there's password protected content, so stuff that's not on the open web. That's always a big challenge with web archives and crawling websites. So at MIT, a lot of the institutional material that is online is either on a wiki, it's behind password protection, and in most cases is restricted in some way, which is why it's behind passwords. So if we were to crawl those sites, which I might be able to do through some mechanisms through Archivit, it would then make that material available, right? So this is part of the issue with web archiving, is that we don't want to be putting restricted content on the open web when it's not supposed to be on the open web. So with web archiving, that's one of the things. There's a lot of different archivists that are sort of working on this issue of what do we do then? How do we manage those kinds of things? Another challenge that I'm a participant in and some other work that's going on nationally is access to sort of the multifaceted web pages over time. So we have HTML on a CD-ROM. We've got a whole variety of the versions of the way things were created, but they weren't ever captured through Web Archive, or that's, we just have them on little diskettes. And so one of the questions is, how do we give access to that kind of content when we have it in multiple ways to researchers, for instance? We could, load those up on a server and then crawl them, but that's not really, that's disingenuous because it's not currently on a server. So there's a variety of things like that, and there's different folks that are looking at that in terms of research issues. How people can do better scoping and crawling, who's crawling which things. There's a project called Cobweb, which Harvard has been involved with, that I've been participating in, sort of kind of advicey on that thing as well. The social media archiving, is it the web, is it internet, is it, what do we want to consider these things? That's just another general kind of issue, and one that we're getting into here, again, with sort of MIT's social media presence type of quality. Reason why we did a one-year pilot and we haven't really launched back into doing a lot with Archivit. I am crawling sites as offices are contacting us and saying, hey, we're changing our website, maybe you might want to do something about that. So we are crawling things, but quality assurance is a huge issue. Temporal drift, even if I wait 5 days to do the QA, and then there's a way that you can sort of fill in the pieces that are missing. But if we wait too long, then what are we actually capturing? What are we saying we're capturing? It's not necessarily the same thing. That can be complicated. And then within the Digital Sustainability Lab, when Jessica Villette was here as a fellow, she did a few different studies and experiments on what optional tools, what other tools are there. So there was Archivit that helped us lead to getting the funding to get the Archivit subscription, but there's other tools as well for doing web crawls and web crawling depending on the types of things that we want to do. Getting the data back into our archive space, which is our archival collection management system. How do we say that this website is part of the records of blah unit or office or person? That's one of the sort of challenges there. So there's other archivists also working on how do we not only sort of port directly the fact that we have a crawl, we've maybe downloaded the work files around that crawl and are preserving them to make sure that that's understood as content that's available within the Institute archives, but also describing that as yet one more thing. So from my perspective, when the fire safety booklet that the police put out, MIT's police thing puts out annually, it used to be a published publication, and the finding data just says we have these things, now they're online. So now I just say, and again, it's online, but now the location is at blah and at these data files instead of the publication that you might find otherwise. We currently have MIT web crawls that I've been doing in the last year. We have 380 gigabytes of data, which represents about 1,500,000 files, unique files. For the MIT affiliates, which are things like the alumni groups, student groups, other things like that, 207 gigs of data from them, and institutional, which means it's a departmental or an administrative website, we have about 171 gigabytes. We are using Browser. We were one of the first pilots on that. When that came out, I was over in Riga, and I was like, hey, I want to use that for our things, because we do have a lot of sort of like the student blogs and the admissions blog. There's a lot of sort of video and things on there. So I've been using the Browser technique to do that. And the Wasapi, the Web Archives API meeting I was at as well. And so we're looking at sort of how we can use the fact that Brewster set up the MIT crawls very early on the Web Archive, on Internet Archive, and being able to sort of go after and pull that content back into our custody in the Institute archive, so we actually are able to preserve and make that available ourselves. It's another thing that we're working on. think those are main things that I wanted to kind of bring up. Just to say that there's a lot going on here, and Joe Carano, who, like I said, is our new digital archivist, starts in a week or two, and web archiving is going to be a main thing that he's going to take on since I've now become the Institute archivist and had a collection, so I'm going to be doing a little bit less myself specifically on this, and then Steve some of that. So, yeah, so that's what I wanted to share for that. Thank you.
Questions? Jefferson? Or
Jefferson, what's the, I think I heard you say that you had 35 petabytes of unique content.
Yes.
That seemed, I was surprised, I was expecting it to be, I don't know, exabytes or something. Yeah, I mean, just when you talk about the, 24/7, I don't know.
So unique just means, there's multiple copies.
Yeah, no, I know. But they, I was thinking about the 24/7 TV and all that kind of stuff. It just seems like it would really could chunk up. So I was curious really about the annual growth that you're currently with all those things.
I think this year is projected to be
Going on.
7 to 8 petabytes, and it has been going up.
Yeah.
Last year was a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good, because when it's just pages, of course, because we know the text. Some of the other things are big.
Gotten bigger, definitely. Mostly the global crawls have been expanded, and we're doing more foreign country domain crawls. I mean, Archivate goes up, but Archivate is only a percentage of the whole. TV is big. I mean, most stuff isn't that big.
Yeah.
So like all the books digitization, I don't know what it's tiny.
Well, but it's big compared to more digital versions of it. So.
Right.
Yeah.
That is true. Well, we don't, that is true. But compared to the web stuff, it isn't. So, yeah. I mean, it was 30 last time we did that number, so.
No, I'm just curious. Somehow expecting you to be like, 500 paradigm,
That'd be also not be expensive, though. We're a small nonprofit.
Get there.
Jefferson, can you talk about legal challenges you've encountered in this process?
Sure. Not that many. So we do, people request something to be taken down, we take it down. So that's just like the normal that happens in the archive. But certainly Wayback Machine is heavily used by the legal community and patent law, prior art kind of community. And it's been proven in court, or judges have allowed it to be used as evidence. So it certainly embedded itself in legal context as a viable record of evidence.
What about in other countries?
So we don't have some of the challenges of dealing with like the European right to be forgotten stuff, which is not really cemented in what that means, right? It's like kind of vague legislation that nobody actually knows anything much about at this point. I mean, I guess they will, I don't really know. Some European places have requirements that the data needs to be on servers in Europe. I wouldn't know if that's a legal challenge or a legal issue, but it's in their law that they have to do that. So, but we have servers in Europe, so we can do that. Those are kind of the main ones. I mean, we don't. I guess we do affidavits and stuff sometimes, but we don't. It's not in court because we're just providing a record, like an archive and attesting that it came from this crawl and this thing. So we're not involved. We don't have too many legal challenges ourselves.
That's great.
Yeah. So obviously fair use gives libraries lots of leeway, as well as the safe harbor provisions of DMCA. So we are a library, we're obviously 501c3, we have an altruistic purpose, so we don't get in too much hot water about like people. There's, some of the interesting ones they're reporting are, it's often, so usually takedown requests have to either come from the content owner or the site owner. That can often be hard to prove. I mean, the content owner is the obvious one, right? Like, that's the one that YouTube and Facebook and all struggle with those issues a lot more, right? Which is that the Sony or the the industry association thing. We'll just do these crazy blanket requests to take down everything that looks like this. So we get lots of fake takedowns. I'm sure other places do too, that are anything that like has the word Mickey Mouse in it, of course, right? Whether it belongs to Disney or not. So I guess that's a like resource challenge because it's hard to deal with packages but not as far as just the providing access stuff, it's been
Has someone done research or analysis on when you were talking about, things get published to the web, but then also people just put stuff up there because it's an easy mechanism for other people to download things. The difference between actual content and just the web being used as a sharing mechanism, in which case things that are crawled are really...
There's no designation for that? Yeah.
There's no anyone's done any analysis on that kind of bucket.
Like how prevalent sharing sites are.
Yeah, just like a website. So like there's a site that someone took like 20,000 MIT PDFs and just threw them up as like, here's a download site. It's not in any context. It wasn't like someone's web page that then was putting these things up in any curatorial way.
Right.
And I was just curious if anyone's done any analysis. Like, it's just a handy mechanism for a Dropbox. It's not a Dropbox.
Right, yeah. I mean, if it's on the open web, it's probably in a crawl, and then it's probably in the archive.
Just in that.
So then when you reverse extract it, you can at least know what URL you're taking it from or what site it's coming from, but not really
anything about this, yeah.
I mean, which is the same with the web, right?
Right.
You can't, I guess one thing I didn't mention is that one thing we're trying to do, well, I don't think it'll ever happen for the entire web archive, but is similarity hashing, sim hashing.
Yeah.
So so we are running sim hash so that, which is more useful to see like how much has a page changed over time, like a text on a web page, but also useful for that, which is like same PDF, it just has a watermark or doesn't, which with a checksum they're totally different, but a sim hash you should hypothetically be able to figure out.
Because within the digital forensic stuff that we're doing, like once we have the stuff down, I'm running that kind of thing, so I can be like, these are all duplicates, these are all these are cross whatever, but doesn't mean you can get rid of them. It's just that it's just interesting to know.
Yeah.
So I'll ask the question I always ask in one form or another, and which I warned you about, but preface it. But you made the point that no future scholarship can study our era without considering materials from the web.
Be a little authoritative.
I think that's correct, and we have, it's rumored that MIT we have people who are interested in social science and history and policy and public health, and all of those would seem to involve later getting evidence from our current era. And it's also rumored that as a library we are partially responsible for enabling that. So where do you, from the IA perspective, where do you think the libraries, especially research libraries, need to engage? And where do you, where can they most effectively engage? What are the biggest gaps from problems that libraries could solve in this area?
Mostly in the research services sort of portion of the talk, because what's been, so we probably get, I'll say 15 to 20 researcher requests a year that want big amounts of web data to study and social science. But they all, even if they're doing data mining and even if they're CS people or have great digital technical skills, they still come in with a monograph-based methodologies to studying something that is like, it was published by this publisher on this day and here it is. And it's just like setting your research question and people's expectations and assumptions about that don't seem to have translated to like the messiness, but also like the affordances of web archives, which have much more data than they ever think they could be, because some people are like, oh, I only want the text HTML. And that might be useful, but actually you can think a lot bigger.
Okay.
Or this thing is captured very infrequently, and so the change that you're trying to document might be a little messier than an exact argument of book editions or things like that.
Well, a sort of follow-up from is, is, if I understand your talk correctly, one point is that collecting is hard, and then retrieving and offering access based on the collection is harder, and that research enabling longitudinal comprehensive thought-centered research on top of that is much, much harder than that, right? Is that so we should be doing the hardest stuff? Is that your...
Sort of. Well, I mean, I think like librarians have great experience in research support, right?
Yeah.
And like helping people who have questions find the materials that help answer those questions. And that gap between the researcher and the web archive is just like massive.
Yeah.
Much more massive than any other form of scholarship related to a specific type of resource. So that seems like the bit, and I mean, just ignoring even the technical challenges of getting people the data.
Wow.
That helping people understand what a web crawl is, why you crawl it, frequency, format.
That sounds great. As I think I've heard around here somewhere, solve hard problems and have fun doing it. Do good things, solve hard problems. I've heard variations on that.
Because it's also matching people's capacity with what they think they want, right? So we often have like grad students that are like, I want this, and I'm like, well, that's 2 petabytes of data. It's like, what are you gonna do with it? It's like, do you have a cluster? No. It's like, I'm gonna look at it on my laptop. You're not gonna look at 2 petabytes of data on your laptop, my friend.
So to give time for group transition, I'm going to ask us all to thank Jefferson now.